Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Eros Talks. Very happy to see you guys on today on Zoom and then also on Instagram and YouTube. Welcome to today's Eros Talk. My name is Yia and I am your host. We have a special talk today with Emmett Farley. As a continuation of the Eros talks that we did with Nicole, the senior staff has continued to give a transmission of Eros and the way that Eros is woven into different parts of our lives, from Tibetan Buddhism to sexuality to the practice, to relationship. And so for today, we have Emmett, who is going to be talking to us about the intersection between Om and Buddhism. So Emmett has practiced orgasmic meditation for 8 years and Tibetan Buddhism for over a decade. He completed the 8-year monastic sutra program through the Asian Classics Institute based on the traditional Gelugpa curriculum and has taught meditation at 3 Jewels in New York City. His work explores the intersection of Om and Buddhism, bringing together stillness and sensation, discipline and desire as a path to awakening. So I'm really excited to introduce Emmett to you guys today and hear what he has to say about the intersection between the two. Go ahead, Emmett.
Hi. Like she said, I'm Emmett. Surprise. It's really great to see everybody. I know most folks on the call. If not as like we've met, I know your names from platform events and things like that. So good to see everybody. Like she said, I'm Emmett. We're going to talk about Buddhism and Eros. As I think everybody probably knows, Buddhism and orgasmic meditation and orgasm and Eros and all those things have come together. Like we have a really connected history. The physical practice that preceded what became orgasmic meditation, it's called doing. It had probably had some other names before that. That really kind of took its initial inspiration from Buddhism, from different traditions that were coming in from the East that had actual sexual practices as part of their spirituality. And so that was back in the 60s. You have like Suzuki Roshi coming to San Francisco and starting his community there. You have Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche coming from the relative East, first in England and then in New York and then throughout the US and Canada. And so he was bringing the Tibetan lineage. And you have so that mixing with new age movements, things like that. It was all kind of coming together with what was happening in America with sexual liberation in general. And so these mindfulness traditions that had practices and entire books and treatises and traditions with sexuality was meeting an audience that was actually really interested in both the spiritual, mindful aspects and philosophies from the East, as well as we're looking to open up sexuality in a way that hadn't really been in America very much. We have kind of when we think back of American history, we go back to the Puritans coming to America for their religious freedom, but their religious freedom is fairly puritanical. So they don't have as much of the sex side of things built into it. And so here we find out we had really had a confluence of sexuality and spirituality. And so that, developed peaks, troughs, but that practice, clitoral stroking practice, whether it was doing or otherwise, that was sort of a background thing, particularly around San Francisco. Nicole had a background in Zen, psychedelics as well. And then she encountered clitoral stroking and this idea of orgasm in this greater sense. And all those three really came together for what she created as orgasmic meditation. And that was really the foundation of the community, One Taste, the business that grew out of it, and what we all came to encounter and know and love as our practice. So I wanted to do, well, actually, I'll give one more piece. So now it's what, 30 years since Nicole grabbed it, made orgasmic meditation what it is. A couple things have happened along the way. And in the past couple of years, Tibetan Buddhism has really come into our practice in Eros as part of the monastery, and we've had the amazing opportunity to study with Lama Glen, his practice leader, his Drupon Chongwol. He is very much leading many things in our world, and he's really brought us to the Tibetan practices, fire pujas, and all the other, if you've come to any of the ceremonies that we've done, anything like that. So in the conversations that we often have with him, a lot that Nicole has done and that we've had these longer conversations of where do Buddhism and those ideas and those precepts and those beliefs, where do those actually meet with Eros in a way where they overlap? And that's what really inspired today's talk. Let's see if I can pull up a slide, give it a shot. Do I have a Buddhism and Eros slide? Amazing. Okay, cool. So that's what I want to kind of go on. I want to set up some of the basic terms. Like Ia said, I have my background in Tibetan Buddhism. That was actually kind of my bridge. I had known about Om for years and knew I wanted to do it, but I kind of needed the Tibetan Buddhism to actually make the bridge to get me there. So I learned a lot of the language and the way that they think. The Gelug tradition in particular is very monastic and debate and logic, and they really like to nail down their definitions so that they know what the other person's talking about. And so I was lucky enough to be able to study that, and it's been really helpful now in Eros to merge the two to understand how to explain these ideas and how they cross over with each other. The first point I want to make, though, is, let's see, here we go. All words are made up. So there's an experience, and then you try to put words on it. The words are not the experience, but we have to communicate to each other, and language is a good way to do it. So we make up these words, and we kind of, split the atom into a million different ways, and then we talk about that as ways to hopefully be talking about the same thing. So a lot of these words are going to be just kind of like close parallels to each other, exact parallels to each other. Well, this kind of says about this and this, but this is talking more about from this slightly different angle. So just as a baseline, remember, all words are just sounds we're making with our mouths to hope that the other person gets an idea of the conception we're trying to communicate with them. So don't get too hung up on any of it. Like I said, obviously our main practice is orgasmic meditation. And that is really, if you want to use the left hand, right hand thing, we really start with a left hand practice. It's extremely experiential. You sign up, you take a class, and that evening you can be having your first Om and having that experience. Even before you're in the nest having an Om, we really zero in on the felt experience that people have. And that's the core that we're always pointing to in Eros, is what is the felt experience you're having here? You go to Tibetan practices, and like I said, Gelug tradition has a lot of debate and meditation, and they write books about books, huge libraries of these things expressing different ideas. And then they also have their practices that are in the physical sense. So this is a fire puja. That's me. That's Chongwala. And here I'm tossing rice in. If I remember correctly, that's for abundance. I have to remember what all the different ingredients represent. And you offer it into the fire, and you're not partaking of it yourself. You're giving it away, and so you'll get the karmic benefits of that, having offered it away to, in this case, it's probably Yamataka. So Buddhism starts, and if you go to any Dalai Lama talk, it'll kind of start with this thing. Okay, we're here. What's the motivation? What are we actually doing with it? And intention in Buddhism really simply, it starts in the way that pretty much every spiritual path starts. Something's not really working, and I would like it to work. I want to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And that is the core thing. The Dalai Lama will often say things like, we're the same. Every living sentient being is the same. They want the things that make them happy. They want to get away from the things that don't make them happy. You're the same as a bug or an amoeba or anything like that. And similarly, so Buddhism starts in just that same kind of way. So if you hear the Buddhist terms for it, they'll talk about taking refuge in Buddhism. And that's really this core motivation. Like, I want to get out of the suffering that I have in my life, and Buddhism seems like the way to get there. And so I'm taking, when things aren't going well, I take refuge in these conceptions, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, things like that. The metaphor that gets used is like if you slip on the stairs, you grab the handrail. You're going to the handrail for your refuge. If life, if you slip in life and something's not going great, what do you reach for in that moment? And so you can try to reach for the handrail, but the handrail might be faulty, it might not work. The idea is we want to grab for something that's going to ultimately work out for us. The other parallel, this is another tradition we use a lot in Eros, but if you AA, the 12 steps, any of the 12-step programs, the first 3 steps are kind of a similar thing. So if that's a tradition you know well, we admit we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. That's kind of the slipping on the stairs piece. We came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Oh, there's a handrail. And we make the decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood him. That would be grabbing the handrail, keeping yourself from tumbling down the stairs. So that's the basis. So if you're looking at this, I would guess I zero in on like, okay, what do we actually mean by suffering though? Because that's kind of maybe an abstract, it's a word that's trying to describe a felt experience. So what do we actually mean by suffering? And suffering, I actually don't really, I know why we use that term. It's a pretty motivational term. Like it seems like, yeah, I want to get out of suffering. I don't want that. That's not enjoyable. But the Sanskrit term, and a lot of the Buddhist words, they'll trace back to Sanskrit. That translates more to like unease. I guess the literal translation is a bad hole. I read something that it was like if you're dragging a cart along one of those old roads, there would be a hole that the wheel would get stuck in along the road. The Tibetan, their direct translation is something that's hard to bear. It's something like multiplying pain is sort of the etymology of the word they use. But I think the best word is actually this unsatisfactoriness. And it's really that like we live life, goes on for as many years as we can hold on to it. And there can be a sense that life might just not be entirely satisfactory to us. It might, we might get something that makes us happy for a little bit, but it doesn't last forever. We get something, it's good, but then it's gone and we're sad about it. So that's what we're talking about here. It's like, what is it about life that just isn't satisfactory in all different ways? And they even talk about in Buddhism, they'll talk about 3 kinds of suffering, 3 kinds of dukkha. So there's just the suffering of suffering, the unsatisfactoriness of things being unsatisfactory. And then there's also the suffering of change, which if you've come to enough Eros talks, you'll hear something like Nicole talking about how you can suffer to end suffering, you can suffer to get out of suffering, or how change occurs in the brain as pain. We actually, even if it's change for good, I'm moving into a bigger house. Oh God, it's such a headache. I gotta figure out how to box up all my stuff. Now I'm here. I gotta unpack everything. I gotta figure out a new morning routine. So even the good things in our brain actually feels like a pain just because it's changing us, something we didn't expect. Our brain is a prediction engine. It doesn't like when things happen it doesn't expect. And then lastly, there's this subtle background unease being driven by ignorance or craving. So Eros, we don't talk about suffering so directly. We don't put as much value on it in the way that it's useful in Buddhism. It's very motivational. You want to get out of suffering. You want to live a life that doesn't have pain, but we actually talk about it in terms of tumescence. And I there's different definitions that get offered in the sutras and things like that. But the first one I remember hearing, what I really like is tumescence as this value neutral, unpotentiated desire. So tumescence we can talk about in a biological sense. That's where the word really kind of comes from, meaning swelling. So think of it in the swelling of genitals, things like that. It's a desire that hasn't come to fruition yet. But we talk about it in terms of purpose too. There's something I want to achieve, there's something I want to create, and that desire's there, but there's the physical reality that's in the way. It hasn't happened yet. So there's this feeling we feel and all the different emotions that come up around desire that hasn't been potentiated yet. But the distinction we make in Eros is that those feelings, that's actually the fuel. Like if you didn't feel those feelings, you wouldn't go and create these realities that we create. So I love this because it actually gives us kind of a window for how to go from the feeling of being stuck is sort of one of the that's the feeling of it often, or a feeling of being separate. We can take these feelings and that actually is what guides us to express our desire to be expressed in the world. So now we'll go to some more Buddhist terms real quick. So we got nirvana, which is, I think everyone knows that term in one way or another. The Buddhist definition of nirvana is the cessation of suffering. So it's the end of suffering. So the Sanskrit, nirvana, the literal translation of that term is meaning to blow out or extinguish the fires of affliction. And so the idea is that, we have these temporary times where like things feel good and then they feel bad, and they feel good and they feel bad. But Nirvana is talking about actually extinguishing the root. We want to get out of suffering and the causes of suffering. We've eliminated the causes of our suffering. And so it's permanent and it's complete, and we no longer are susceptible to those aspects. So like you're blowing out a candle, you're extinguishing the flame. It's not flickering anymore where there's suffering, there's not suffering, things like that. We're blowing it out, it's done. The Tibetan term for nirvana, they have a slightly different way of putting it, and the literal translation is gone beyond suffering. If anybody knows the Heart Sutra, whether you've done Zen or Tibetan Buddhism, anything like that, it ends with gone, gone beyond, totally gone, meaning gone beyond the place where you can actually experience the suffering. But their meaning of it in the same way as this permanent and complete end of the potential to experience anything as suffering. So anyone remembers Ram Dass's lovely book, he had this page in there. There's the Heart Sutra mantra. So I'll jump back a sec. So depending on what your intention is, if you just want to get out of suffering, that will get you to nirvana. That's the complete end of suffering. But particularly in what's known as Mahayana Buddhism, so there's Hinayana, which is the little vehicle, meaning just yourself. I want to get out of suffering. I want to get myself out of suffering. And then there's Mahayana, the greater vehicle. And that's this aspiration to get everybody else out of suffering as well. So not just yourself, but everybody. And there's within Mahayana, then you get to Vajrayana Tantra, which is like, I want to get myself and everybody out of suffering, and I'll use whatever I have to do it. They get a little more hands-on in Vajrayana, like throwing the rice into the fire, things like that. They're doing the ceremonies. They're, in our case, homing. Actual practices, not just the philosophy of it. So that's what takes us to Bodhicitta, which is the greater aspiration, the bigger goal. So Bodhicitta, it's Sanskrit for awakening mind. The simple definition is the wish to attain total enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, yourself included. The long technical definitions we can probably gloss over, but there's that greater vehicle, that's that Mahayana I was talking about getting Buddhahood for the benefit of all. But then there's also this other little part here I wanted to point to, uniting the two thoughts in the main mind, the wish to become a Buddha and the wish to help all sentient beings. Now, the two is kind of a clue there, because there's two types of bodhicitta. And this was a sort of a sticking spot in a recent conversation that we were having in terms of like, how do you go into an om, or how do you go into a makeout, or how do you go into any kind of interaction with the intention of bodhicitta? Because just from the basis of it, you're trying to help someone else. But at the end of the road, it's like, what's really separating me from this other person? So I can go in with good intentions, compassion, things like that. But if that's my basis, is that's where I'm starting from, then there's already kind of a misperception of how reality works. We're not fully seeing how interconnected we all are. So we talk about it in terms of relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. And there's other words like, instead of relative, I think the Tibetan term they actually use is deceptive bodhicitta, meaning deceptive reality, the reality that kind of tricks you a little bit. They'll also translate it as conventional or nominal. But it's the kind of compassion that we walk around the everyday world with. Like, I want to help this person. I'm not doing so great. I want to help myself. But it's this sort of just our baseline way of like, oh, I'm doing a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. Matthias is saying, the near friend. And that's the tricky part when you get hung up on relative bodhicitta, you get hung up on the sense of there being a separation. You can end up with what's the near friend of compassion, and that's pity. So we do free food where we have a free restaurant. Anyone who wants to come can come. Particularly, we invite people who are challenged in terms of getting food for themselves, whether they're challenged in having a home or just money's tight or anything like that. But our intention is that we're really flipping it on its head to try and break that misperception. It's really like the serving, you get a lot from serving somebody. It's like I walk out of there feeling great and they got a meal. Hopefully they feel great too. But I'm not like doing something for them. There's a real kind of exchange that's happening where we both get to benefit. And so that's where we use relative bodhicitta. We use the convention of giving someone food, but we're really engaging with the whole of it. We're really engaging with it in a way where it's the act of giving that's important. And everyone benefits from that act of generosity. The person receiving the food, the person who's receiving the experience of giving the food itself gets better. So relative bodhicitta, and this is kind of the technical definition here, a conventional wish for enlightenment. It still rests on ignorance. We're not completely enlightened yet. We still got a little chink we're working on. An aspiration that appears genuine, but it's ultimately inaccurate because it hasn't been grounded in the true nature of phenomena. So there's two parts of that. There's the altruistic intention. There's in Tibetan, there's mun semkye, the wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of others. And then juk semkye, the engaging. So those are actions, compassionate actions that benefit other beings. So it's not just in your head, it's actually, you want to use body, speech, and mind, make a real powerful karma, and slingshot yourself to enlightenment. Isn't that great? Man, it's hard, with you tell the jokes and like, but I understand everyone's got to stay on mute, but woof. If you want to get into the legal parts of it, this is the mens rea of it and the actus rea, or in our case, actually, we're doing a good act, so actus bonum. Be a joke for our lawyer friends. So the other side of things, ultimate bodhicitta. So this is the realization at the end of the path. This is where we actually want to get to. So it's non-conceptual, direct realization of emptiness. Emptiness being the potential of all things, the lack of self-nature. If we were actually suffering, if we were actually all the things that we think we are, then we wouldn't be able to have this. But everything is totally potential. So we can have the realization. It's the non-dual wisdom that underlies and validates relative bodhicitta. So this is what, when we have this realization, and I think if anyone here has done deep meditation or psychedelics or anything like that, there's that kind of there's that realization moment where everything explains itself in reverse, and we get to see how all of the things we've done, the things other people have done, how they've all led to this experience that's incredibly satisfying, that we actually, we're at the end of the rainbow. And that's the truth that we organize around, whether that's in Eros or whether that's in Buddhism, whether that's any of these other traditions. there's this experience that we have where everything else just kind of clicks. All the other parts of it make sense. And so this is what we're really organizing around. And when we talk about ultimate bodhicitta, the thing that we're pointing to with free food, for instance, makes sense. It couldn't be any other way. Of course, like I'm enjoying giving someone food, they're enjoying receiving it. We have this beautiful experience, and it's all connected in this seamless, connected flow. When we talk in Eros, we talk more in terms of orgasm. We talk in terms of orgasm, not just in the sense of climax, something that's beyond that. And we talk about really getting to the orgasmic state. The experience, it's usually it's a moment right before you would go into climax. There's the sense of we'll do these bullet points. There's a sense of satisfaction. There isn't anything that you would want different or more than what's happening in this moment. The unpotentiated desire of tumescence and desire are actually coming into union. There's a oneness there. There's the feeling that we're totally locked on the spot. And the spot is changing and dynamic, and things are moving and things are happening, but each and every moment of that is satisfying in itself. We're completely in the moment. And we feel an intimacy with all things, like stroker and strokee. There's not even really a separation. We'll talk about how like the stroke is happening, not this person is doing this to this person and this person's this and that. And there's a connection that happens and a dynamism that happens that really, like in free food, that example, everything is participating in this state together. That annoying sound from outside the window, that's part of it. There isn't anything we're trying to keep separate. We're completely open to the entirety of the experience, and the entirety of the experience is just pure, unadulterated bliss. And we're totally in the moment, the entirety of the moment. We're not looking to the future. We're not thinking about, oh, I wish I did. Oh, I think my hair's kind of messed up. I wish I had combed it before. Like we're not pulled out of anything. We're able to sit right where we are, and the whole of it all makes sense. Everything that led up to it contributed to this moment. Everything that's happening in this moment is part of the expression of the orgasm that's moving through both of us. We talk about the state of flow, which is in a lot of ways pointing to the same thing, whether it's, those sort of life or death moments, some extreme sports, things like that, but everything's happening in one, like a surfer will, it doesn't feel separate from the wave. It's all of one. It's all one experience, and you couldn't add or subtract an element from it and be in this ultimately satisfying experience. And so I love talking about things in terms of orgasm and not just enlightenment. Because again, we're using words. We're kind of trying to point at things through the veil. And enlightenment, I know I've had this one, and I think it's a common conception where like we think of it as sort of this state that's just sort of fixed. It's at the end. We're sort of floating out there, maybe a little detached from the happenings of the world. I don't think that's what like Chogyam Trungpa would really be describing enlightenment as. But that's, just the word of it seems a little detached. And orgasm is so incredibly based in our physical reality. It is from our body. It is moving. It is at times loud. It can be many things, but it's so here, and it's so alive. It's when we feel the most alive. And so I love using orgasm to point really toward that experience, toward an entire integrated experience that really brings us into intimacy with everything, that doesn't cut off the uncomfortable, that doesn't like push away, suffering, quote unquote. It's that the whole of it turns alive, and the whole of it is this incredible experience. So I think our language there is actually, I'll say, better. Tumescence and orgasm, I think we actually kind of did better than the translators. I won't say that the Tibetans and the Sanskrit and the Pali and all the people over there meant those things. And then lastly, so the intention of Eros. So this was, Nick's kind of mentioned this a couple of times, but our intention in Eros isn't just to get out of suffering. It's not just to remove ourselves from the world, but we actually want to get into flight. We want to experience that orgasmic state. We want to really have that experience that gives us something to zero in on. And that becomes that truth that we orient everything around, that ultimate bodhicitta, that is what we measure. Well, was this on? Was this off? Is this actually helpful, or is it not? That orgasmic state is something that we zero in on, and we cultivate it, and we actually work to expand it, so the whole of our lives can be lived from that place, in that experience. And so we've taken to calling that flight. And so the intention of Eros is really to get into flight and get everyone else into flight with you, because it's more fun that way. We want the game keeps growing and keeps expanding, and the more we actually have the intimacy with others, the greater that force of orgasm is that is acting through all of us and into the world. So I think we're talking about the same thing for the most part. I think our language is a little better here and there. They got some really good specifics. If you want to watch some debates and that kind of thing, they've really zeroed in on some stuff. Bliss, great word. They use it all the time in Buddhism. They're talking about orgasm. They're talking about the same thing. They're talking about experience. Because honestly, isn't if you just got enlightened and you were floating out there and you had this realization, but it kind of just felt like nothing, what's the real impetus for it? The idea is that we get to a place that's ultimately satisfying, that actually has us come alive and be able to express that aliveness through what we got. So I'll stop the screen share here. That was my fun little lecture with a bunch of slides. And I'd love to open up for questions, or if there are other from different traditions that you've seen parallels between these and what they're pointing to. This is great to start to merge these different ideas and understand that how we're talking to each other across them.
Thank you so much, Emmett. A great presentation and talk. Anybody who have a question or a comment, go ahead and raise your virtual hand, and I will go ahead and call on you. Shannon.
Hi, Emmett. I was thinking about some of you talked about Buddhism and Eros and the own practice, and there are some things that overlap and they weave together, and there are some things that are a little different. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about intention and bodily sensation. Like, for example, some Tibetan Buddhism practices are intended to generate heat in the body, and then in Om we feel sensation, but there's not usually an intention to make anything specific happen. And I just wanted to hear if you had thoughts about that.
Yeah. I think, I mean, all practices are for what you're up to in the moment. One thing a teacher once told me about Buddhist stuff, he's like, most of the Buddhism that gets taught in America is the stuff that if you were in Tibet or I guess Dharamsala or something like that these days, like it's like realize they enter the monastery when they're like, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. A lot of this basic Buddhism stuff is meant for kids. So a lot of times you have to kind of think in who's the audience for this. Om is a particular practice. We leverage the biology, and we have the biology is set up so that if you start stroking a clitoris, sensations and feelings happen. And so we can start from what our biology is already geared up to produce a lot of heat, whether that's literal heat or more metaphorical heat. And that can just naturally on its own, I'll use the Buddhist term, cook the karmas, bring stuff up, have us feel things. And then the intention, I think we often, what do we always say? With no intention other than to feel. So we just really set that as like, you're going to start here, and we trust that the feeling of bliss alone works things out. Now, Buddhism, they got a million different meditations. You're meditating for this, for that. The beginning of all practices, you're starting with like Sangye Chodan Soki. I want to become a Buddha for the sake of all enlightened beings. I want to get everybody out of suffering. I'm going to do this through all my lives. Help me, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Like, we set the intention in that kind of way. And but there's also, with something like Tumo practice or any like these really rigorous Buddhist practices, at the end of them, you do Mahamudra, which is very similar to Om in the sense of like, and now you just sit there and have that experience. And now you sit there in the realization of the practice. So there's heat generating, there's visualization generating, and then there's the dissolution and the relaxing into the results of that practice. I hope that answers it.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Shannon. And then we have Hannah. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd never heard the part about like the little bodhicitta and like the bigger bodhicitta before. So that was kind of fun. And I guess my question is like, what have you personally noticed about how like doing more Tibetan Buddhist practices has shown up or hasn't shown up, like the things that are different, how they might show up in your own practice?
Sure. And Shannon just mentioned Tumo. And if you do that practice, there's a lot. That's one of those kind of like generates a lot of heat, and just you're a yogi, you know all about channels and nadis and things like that. But or even kind of like for anybody that does Bikram, where they'll say like just add Bikram, and all of a sudden you'll find yourself eating more healthy. We used to say just add Om, and things just kind of start to work themselves out. If you're adding in these practices, they add a kind of energy and a kind of rigor that just seem to sort of work things out. Like they make the parts that aren't working more obviously not working, the parts that are working more obviously working. The parts that make you a little heavy, well, you start to really notice that. The things that make you a little too high, you start to notice that too. So I think any of those Tibet's cold in the winter. They have a lot of practices for generating heat, just even mantra stuff. You do like an hour of Vajrasattva, Jesus. So I think like a lot of that stuff just gets everything more turned on and receptive and alive and able to feel the sensation that helps us guide through.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. And I was wondering because I think, in Tibetan Buddhism, something that I find really cool is like the land guardians and like how you actually work with like where you are physically. And yeah, maybe there's an impact of that. Like if you
Yeah. I mean, the cosmology in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, maybe in particular, is wild. Like they have, and a lot of that's cultural too. Like a lot of that Tibetan stuff, those were spirits that they were practicing with shamanic traditions before Buddhism got there. They even have a shamanic tradition that Buddhism got there. They're like, yeah, we do that with Bon. That's what we're doing here. Like you go to Japan, they have the whole Shinto thing, but they bring it all into this, to the realization of Buddhism. And so the idea is that like and Christianity did the same thing too, where like these pagan rituals got incorporated in, but the ultimate thing that they're looking to serve is this maybe more subtle or more fully realized, or they want it kind of like how there's practice for all the different kind of things. These different beings, whether they're gods or spirits or Buddhas or dakinis or taras or any of these things, they help us engage with those spots. And then on the other side, like, we kind of like, if you're just American Joe walking around through the woods, like there's a feeling we get, there's a sense of it. Like we actually have a conception that, these different traditions just went as far as to personify, but we have a feeling of like, Montana feels a certain kind of way. The land feels a kind of certain way. New York feels a kind of certain way. And we interact with them as these whole beings. And I think Tibetan Buddhism does a great job in like, well, how do you actually like honor a place? Like, I want to, like, I have this urge to make an offering. This is a beautiful experience. How do I do that? And so I think it gives a lot of templates and applies a lot of those templates in a lot of ways to have that relationship with what's around us.
Yeah, I love that so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Hannah. And then we'll go to Eli.
It's awesome. I'm trying to think of how exactly to formulate this. I'm doing it on the fly. So, I have my own background in Zen and you come from Tibetan, and I'm kind of thinking like, I don't really see exactly how to, like, what would they look like if they were to live in the same house? Like Eros and Zen, like what kind of relationship would they have? And I've puzzled over this for a long time. What do you see when you look into like, you know, like in Emmett's dream world, if you look down the line and you're like, okay, these traditions exist in some, configuration, like what do you think they're being drawn towards here? Like what's your vision? What do you, not your vision, but like what's in your vision?
I think being drawn towards is that ultimate realization. We point to it as orgasmic state. They both point to it as ultimate bodhicitta, and then the rest is just. I think it's a Sufi saying that like there's an infinite paths to an infinite God. I think that's kind of the route of it. And I remember this was a Tibetan guy one time, so you can use a grain of salt with this if you want, but he was actually said Zen is from Tibetan Buddhism. There was Tibetan Buddhism, and that shamanic tradition I was talking about, actually, Bon, has what's called Dzogchen, which is the great perfection. And it's that kind of like vast mind, the relaxation kind of like melting into emptiness that you would do at the end of a lot of Tibetan sadhana. So Dzogchen went to China and became Chan. Chan went to Japan and became Zen. And Japan obviously had Shintoism, animal spirits, and these sorts of things. And it merged, and it's the cultural basis that Buddhism kind of goes into wants to make use of all of that. Like, the Buddha is walking around with all these Vedic understandings in India, and so that's the basis for how he teaches. But it's, like Nick says, portable enlightenment. It can go anywhere, and the realizations and the way of engaging and creating the relationship and developing the intimacy with your surroundings is still, that's the particular path for that particular circumstance to get to that same experience that's unique in every moment of it, unique to every individual, and that particular element of it that's we're actually able to point to and say, we are having that experience together. We are in that.
Thanks, Eli. Let's go to Matthias.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing, Emmett. I have a reflection, if you'd like.
Please, your reflections are famous.
Um, from the threads of Buddhist practice wandering from the East, a confluence of sex and spirit, and touching the spot, our tiger birthed the primordial sound and practice of Om. Freedom's intention, a choiceless choice to grab the handrail of Eros to avoid the terror of tumescence. Instead, surrendering to change, intending nothing but to feel, and turns into fuel, lighting the extinguishing into the gone beyond, enlivening all to a life of flight, poetic union in bliss, all leading to this.
Hey now. That's great. I love the tiger.
Thank you, Matthias. And then we'll wrap up the last question and reflection with Carol. Hi, Carol.
Hey there. Sorry to barge in late, and then I thought I had a client and she canceled, and then I saw this, and
My luck.
I wish I had known earlier. But anyway, so yeah, Buddhism is actually derived from Vedic philosophy, and I've been well steeped in that since I moved to Fairfield. Well, and even before. And so, what I can say in answer to Eli's question from personal experience is that practicing the two together actually creates a glide path because um, the Veda is based on natural law. And I always equate natural law and the feminine, or you could say the erotic, like natural law is the erotic. And so, uh, it's one thing to sit and meditate, and I do every day, twice a day. But then to also actually manifest that through the physical experience of Om, it actually creates a glide path. And so I can say for myself, my vibratory field has been expanding and just feeling like connected to all of it. And also I spent 10 days in Tibet a few years ago. And I love everything that you're saying about like how it's all based on like their cultural background before Buddhism came there, and it's still like really prevalent in the culture there. And it's all very connected to the land and to nature. And yeah, so it's really about connecting to ourselves in the context of nature and then just expanding out from there. That's my own personal experience. Like that's how I marry the two. I feel
Yeah,
like a
I
glide
love
path.
putting it in terms of natural law. I think that's a big piece. I don't know that it gets talked about as much in Buddhism, but I particularly in Eros, like we talk about leveraging biology and really this is just sort of like it's how this phenomenon arises. It just comes from what's naturally here.
Yeah, I heard something yesterday that Maharishi always talks about being like 200% of yourself. And because sometimes people who are in the spiritual realm or world, they tend to downplay the physical, as if we're supposed to all ascend in the
Yeah,
physical. And he's saying, no, it's like this is the expression of the spiritual. It's about being 100% in the physical and 100% in the spiritual. So you get 200% of of your being. And I absolutely love that. And I think Om provides the glide path for that.
yeah, yeah, that's great.
Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, that is all the time we have. We're going to wrap up the call with some reflections. So go ahead and raise your hand for some reflections to Emmett. It could be based on anything that you've heard or was shared today. We'll go ahead and start with Joe.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah. Hey, Emmett. What I noticed with you is it feels so good. It's like you have all this experience in Buddhism, and yet you show up here sharing your expertise, but not being anyone's guru, not being anyone's expert. You're like, hey, this is what I know. And what I've found most about our group, is that that's what our Sangha is. It's like a bunch of people trying to figure it out. And I think that's a misperception that a lot of people have about like Nick and Rachel, that they were somehow like considered gurus. But I think all of us know, like, no, they weren't. They were just fellow friends on this path who had a lot of cool experiences, and then we all leveraged that together. And I know, and so having you talk just amplified that to me. It's like, yeah, here's another guy with a ton of experience. His expertise is coming out, and he's just sharing it. So thanks.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Nancy.
Hi, Emmett. Thank you so much for your transmission of the merging of like where Om and Buddhism cross and Eros Buddhism. And it reminded me of when I first started Buddhism. I had almost 10 years of Om, and I wasn't understanding it, but today you reminded me that it's like I felt it. I could feel the transmission before I understood it. And then today, with your sharing, it helped me put some pieces together of my 4 or 5 year experience. So I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. And then we'll wrap up the last reflection with Marla. Go ahead, Marla.
Hi, Emmett. Thank you so much. I'm driving, so I'm not going to be on camera, but I loved how you brought the practical applications to Om and makeouts and even just communication, and thinking about the 2 types of bodhisattvas, and like, am I maybe when I cook a meal thinking that I'm not the doer, but when I'm making out, I'm thinking I'm the doer. And so I just loved that you brought that thought, and I'm going to be noodling on it for a while. So thank you.
Perfect. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marla. All right, that is all the time we have. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. We will be back on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much.